All right, so much for health care. The Trump administration turning its attention to tax reform, and it looks like 20% of taxpayers would pay more under the new plan.
Yeah, joining us on the Koga News Live line is CPA and Senior Manager at BKM Sowan Horan, Aaron MacPhie. Good morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
So who exactly would end up paying more under the new tax reform plan, and why?
You know, it's very hard at this stage to really know any, concrete details about who would actually be paying more. To date, the Trump administration has only, released a one-page kind of summary of their tax plans, what they would like to see from tax reform. So there's, just a lot of speculation going on at this point.
Well, from what we're looking at note-wise, it looks like both the very rich and the very poor would be among those least affected by higher rates. But, I mean, isn't it the middle class that has just been squeezed to death?
Yeah, that is true. But, based on his, skeleton plan that he has out there, he's looking at simplification, which could benefit the middle class to where, there's a lot less complexity in the system, so maybe they could do their own tax return.
Yeah, but that's $100 a year in savings. I mean,
right? Yeah, exactly. But doubling the standard deduction would also help as well. As well as repealing the alternative minimum tax and a couple other things too.
Okay, so when are we expected to hear details on this new tax plan?
Congress is actually just starting the process right now. They released a preliminary budget, and so, based on that, that's kind of where the ball gets rolling. Because there's going to be a lot of analysis done and a lot of debate in Congress. So, what we see the president ultimately sign is going to be fairly different than, what we have to go on right now.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll be able to get some more information and soon. Eric MacPhie, who is a CPA and Senior Manager at BKM Sowan Horan, we appreciate the time.
What about a Trump tax cut? That's supposed to be down the way. What's that look like if we ever get to it? CPA tax analyst, Senior Manager at BKM Sowan Horan. Is that how I say that, Aaron?
Yes.
Sowan Horan, learned numbers man. How are you?
Doing great. How are you doing?
This is Aaron MacPhie. Okay, Aaron, healthcare is done. I thought we had to do healthcare before we got to a tax cut. So you've analyzed the Trump tax cut. What did you see?
There's not a whole lot to see just yet. All they've released is a one-page kind of summary with some just some highlights, basically, nothing in particular. So, there's going to be a long road ahead of us, by the time this makes it through Congress.
So what you saw on the one-sheeter, how's it look? What do you think?
There's definitely some good things in there. I think the repeal of the alternative minimum tax is great. That's going to help a lot of people that, have complex tax returns, maybe simplify their returns and be able to do their own tax return, which would be, a very big plus for a lot of people, saving the tax fee.
Now, I know what you do. You're just one of those numbers guys, CPA tax analyst. You're a guru at this kind of thing. But if I had my druthers, Aaron, I would just say, listen, I made $50,000 and I owe you guys 19%, and let's call it a day. Can we never simplify it to that extent?
I don't think it's that easy. There's a lot of people out there that have non-traditional forms of income. When you get into investments and partnerships and that type of thing, it really definitely complicates things.
Mm-hmm.
But probably 90% of your folks out there that are just W-2 employees, I think those folks definitely could get to that point.
Okay, so the old Paul Ryan would want to send it on a postcard. Do you think that could happen to 90% of the folks?
Just roughly, I think a lot of the folks that, if they just have a W-2, they probably could get down to a postcard.
Okay. All right. So, but probably nothing imminent. We're not talking about a tax cut for America at this point. Everything is so slow in Washington. How are regulations and things like that? I mean, are we going to loosen it up a little bit? Will that help?
I'm not sure if that would help. I think it's the politics right now are so divisive that who knows what's going to be able to get through.
Right. No, it's crazy. I know your industry has plenty of regulations and all kinds of things, hoops you got to jump through.
Right.
You got a master's in professional accounting. Have you ever looked at something and said, you know what? I don't know.
All the time, but I know where to find the answers. The key.
You got colleagues and resources you can figure out. All right, last thing, Aaron MacPhie, CPA. Last thing I want to ask you about. You got a horse farm?
I do. Yeah, you live in Texas. You got to be able to have the horses. I don't ride them to work, but I definitely have them at home.
You can ride then, huh?
Oh yeah.
So, do you have a favorite horse?
Yeah. One of them is one of my favorites. Its name is Storm. It looks just like Silver.
Oh, like Lone Ranger?
Yeah.
Come on, man. You're living the dream. You're living the dream. Come on. Nice. It's crazy. Are they smart? Can they come to you when they see you? Do they know you? Does Storm know you?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But do you think they're pretty smart? Horses pretty smart?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, they're very smart. They know when to come and when to run away. They know you're up to something.
Really? Well, my English cream golden retriever can balance my checkbook for cheese. Can Storm do that for cheese, or they like apples better?
They like apples and hay.
That's awesome. How often do you get out there? Every weekend?
Yeah, every week. Yeah, there's always something to do.
Yeah, I bet. So you're a working man. Your hands aren't those accountant hands, man. You're a working man.
That's true.
Hey, nice meeting you, Aaron. I appreciate the insight.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
All right.
23 after 9 o'clock, Jeff Angelo on News Radio 600 WMT, News Radio 1040 WHO. Tuesday, July 18th. Thanks for spending some of your Tuesday with me. We do like to dig into policy in this show and actually tell you how it's going to affect your pocketbook. And that's why I was intrigued by an analysis that's been released by the Tax Policy Center. They say what we know right now about Trump's tax plan. 71% of taxpayers would have a lower tax bill, but 20% of taxpayers could pay higher taxes. Let's chat about that with CPA tax analyst and senior manager at BKM Sowan Horan, Aaron MacPhie. Aaron, welcome to WHO WMT. Thanks very much for joining me this morning, and good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You know, Aaron, whenever it's easy for politicians to say, I'm going to cut your taxes so big. But we know that when there's tax reform, there's winners and losers in tax reform. So based on what we know about the Trump tax plan, who are the winners? Who are the losers?
I think it's just really early to be able to tell. So far, the Trump White House has only released a one-page guide, I guess, you will, of just their wish list of what they'd like to see out of tax reform. And so there's a lot of guesswork that's going on right now. This is going to be dramatically different from what ultimately is going to pass through Congress and get signed by the White House. So there's a lot of speculation going on right now about who's going to be affected and how much they're going to be affected.
And based on what we're seeing, Aaron, and I'm interested in talking to you as a CPA and a tax analyst, I always worry that whenever we're talking about tax reform, it's not going to make my taxes any simpler. What are you thinking on that?
Yeah, simplification is actually one of the items that they're looking at very strongly. So they're talking about, eliminating a lot of these tax breaks that make, the tax, doing your taxes a lot more complex.
Right.
And they're also looking at doubling the standard deduction. So, when you itemize, that's definitely one of the areas that's more complex for just your standard taxpayer.
Right.
And so through this simplification process, hopefully, your standard W-2 wage earner would be able to do their own tax return using a software package, instead of having to pay someone else to do it for them.
And is that something when we talk about you're just a middle-class working person and you're talking about doubling that standard deduction, is that one of the ways, Aaron, that would be a really, really big help to those taxpayers that are not the very poor or the very rich?
Yeah, I believe so. Right now you either itemize or you get your standard deduction.
Yeah.
And by doubling the standard deduction, it cuts down on the paperwork that they have to keep up with, and also, there's some areas where they wouldn't have necessarily had that large of a deduction, to cover living expenses.
Let me ask you, Aaron, about the fears that you think taxpayers would have. I know simplification sounds easy to do, but of course you are talking about what you just said, which is you got to take away some deductions. So, for example, if you're going to go after for the mortgage interest deduction or something like that, that's a scary prospect for a lot of taxpayers, isn't it? Because you and I and other taxpayers, we base our behavior on what the tax code currently is. So that would seem to be a real problem if you're going to change the rules.
It could be, but they are talking about maintaining the deductions for home ownership, such as your property taxes and your mortgage interest deductions, and they're also talking about retaining charitable gift tax deductions. So there's a lot of mechanics that they're going to have to walk through to get that done, but it does sound like they're considering those aspects that are dear to the middle class for sure.
And I know, Aaron, you've looked at this one sheeter the Trump campaign put out, or the Trump administration put out, and then there's an analysis released by the Tax Policy Center, and they're saying that some taxpayers in every income level would end up paying higher taxes. And as you can imagine, it's always controversial if you're in a lower income tax bracket that you might end up paying higher taxes. So how does that work? According to this analysis, how does this hit every income bracket?
So what they're looking at doing is maybe scaling back the earned income tax credit that your lowest wage earners typically would get. So, that's a refund that they get that they never even really paid in the first place. So it's a kind of a credit for working and an incentive for working. But that would be, they're not actually paying more tax; they're just getting less of a refund due to that elimination of that tax credit that they're considering.
But as you're saying, I mean, realistically, if you were affected by that, you sure wouldn't like it.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah, that's definitely cash out of your pocket.
Right.
Sure.
Right, exactly. So anything else that you saw in the plan, Aaron, that you were intrigued by? You work with taxes all the time. You're always analyzing taxes. Anything else that you saw in the plan and you thought, well, there's an interesting idea, either on the good or bad side?
Yeah, I think one of the really major things that they're looking at is this one-time tax on funds that have been held overseas. You hear about all these big companies moving their tax base offshore because the U.S. tax system is so high for businesses. It's 35% right now. There's a lot of other countries that you've got a really low tax base. Well, they're talking about doing a one-time tax deal where you pay a little tax and they can repatriate those funds. But it'd be a windfall for the U.S. government for sure, and help out with cash flow for U.S. businesses.
That's CPA Aaron MacPhie. Aaron, always appreciate your expert advice on this. Thanks very much for joining me this morning.
Sure.
And, of course, we're looking down the road here to the possibility of a new tax plan as put forth by the Trump administration. And Aaron MacPhie joins us right now, CPA and tax analyst. And, Aaron, we're hearing that about 20% of taxpayers could pay higher taxes under the Trump tax reform plan, according to at least one analysis. But does that mean 80% would be paying lower taxes?
Not necessarily. It all depends on how things kind of shake out when all the tax bills roll through Congress. There's a long road ahead, so a lot of this is just conjecture at this point.
Well, did they get a CPO check of this thing to see what the ultimate cost is going to be to the taxpayers?
I think they did, but there really isn't a whole lot of detail available for them to do a very thorough analysis. Trump has really only released a one-page summary of his goals as far as tax reform go. From dropping the tax brackets down to 3 from 7, and doing a couple other things like doubling the standard deduction and things like that. But there's no real specifics, in place yet.
And they're saying that taxpayers in every income level are going to end up paying higher taxes. Who would pay more in each bracket?
When they're looking at the lower end, there's a couple of provisions that they're discussing, potentially doing away with the earned income tax credit. That's what's going to really, affect the lowest brackets. And then the other portion would be kind of the middle class area, by doubling standard deduction and moving around a couple other deductions. A lot fewer people are going to be itemizing, which would simplify taxes, for a lot of Americans. But really, it's hard to tell at this point. It's so early in the game.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a simplified tax form and not have to go through all the itemizing and everything like that. But I don't think we're ever going to come to that because any way you look at it, regardless of what this tax plan has, given what's happened with the health care plan, it really doesn't have any chance of getting through Congress, I think.
I'd agree with that. It's been kind of an upward battle. But for what I understand, Congress does have the ability to use the reconciliation method, using the budget process, where they just need a simple majority. And that's going to be their best bet as far as getting tax reform through.
But you're going to have trouble even doing that because there's so many critics of the plan, and you've got these people in Congress who are so fearful of what might happen in 2018 that a lot of them are saying, well, wait a minute, there's so-and-so's paying more or so-and-so's paying less, or it's benefiting the rich, or whatever the case may be, and they're just not going to go for it.
Right, yeah. And when it comes down to it, they're going to have to do something. Or keep the same plan in place. But I just don't see the majority of the Republican Congress going for that alternative.
So, Aaron, overall, who do you think the ultimate winners and losers are with this tax plan?
I think the winners will be the middle class. Simplified, tax plan, simplified filings. Maybe somebody that had to go see a professional like myself may be able to prepare their return on their own due to simplification. And I do think that the wealthy will be hit some with this tax plan, although at this point they're looking at possible repeal of the 3.8% Obamacare tax on net investment income. So potentially the rich could benefit from the lower capital gains rates.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And Aaron, do you have a website?
Yeah, it's BKMSH.com. It's BKM Sowan Horan, and our main office is in Dallas.
All right, Aaron, thanks for being with us on AM Tampa Bay.
Sure, absolutely.